Thank you, Michael. Let us now begin with the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax, which now appear on your screen. We remind you to make your calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid some feedback. Thank you. Our first question this morning, or today rather, comes from the Centro Universitario de Tijuana in the Mexicali campus. And if we may have the question, please.
We are hearing the conversation of the floor out there in the back. Can you just cut it out? There is a conversation going on the floor. Aló, adelante. Hay... Clear sound.
Okay. We'll get that resolved. And let's move to the question, if we may, from Santo Domingo. And if we could have the question, please. Centro de Gestión y Investigación.
How does it influence in a country the fact that the country lives at a slower pace? How does that influence the fact that a country lives at a slower pace? How does that influence on the country's entering or insertion in the global economy, global marketplace?
Okay. Alex, let's go to you with this one. We have a country with a different pace of life or lifestyle perhaps than what we know in the U.S. How does this 24-hour society translate into them?
Well, it's actually a critical barrier to entry into faster-paced economies in simple, practical ways. For instance, think about communicating with a company that's subcontracted to produce things in a factory of your country, or developing shared programs with educational institutions. If the clock you're on is different from the clock that other people in another country are on, that's going to be a barrier, and it may even be something as practical as turning around orders or requests for information on time.
Very good. Michael, a follow-up on that, please.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good question, a very important point, and I think it is difficult for local cultures who will be influenced by this, but I think it basically reflects the reality of globalization, which is a critical thing driving the whole of the 24-hour process, and basically countries cannot stand apart from that. So I think inevitably, as Alex was saying, you know, the pressures will be there, and countries will have to adapt. So I think there are some possibly sort of rather rude, you know, awakenings awaiting the way countries lead their lives and the pace of life there.
How can we overcome that, this rude awakening? Is there a mechanism by which we can suggest that can get them up to speed, so to speak?
Well, I think there are one area is obviously new technology is an important area for sort of getting over some of the problems, but otherwise, you know, it's a difficult process of change. I mean, you know, Alex is going to pick up on some of these issues in his presentation, and it's just that it's difficult, but it needs to be done.
You've got to start practicing. Let's go to our next question, if we may, please, from the Federación Nacional de Comerciantes in Medellín, Colombia. The question, please. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, we're going to go to a call from Cuba, please, and that call is going to be coming to us from the Cinia Internet. The question, please. Okay, while we're getting that resolved, let's move to a question that comes to us from the Universidad Blas Pascal. And gentlemen, what sectors will be most affected by the move to a 24-hour society? What work sectors or perhaps economic sectors? Michael, we'll start with you.
I think one of the critical points about the whole all of this is that initially at this stage it's mostly business-faced sectors which are influenced, and it's obviously retail outlets. But my view is that increasingly it's going to affect the service sector, and particularly areas like financial services, telecommunications, media are obvious examples. But the important thing about the whole of this 24-hour phenomenon is it's going to affect everywhere. So it is going to affect education, it is going to affect government. And I think public services in particular will need to recognise that citizens are going to increasingly demand a sort of total access, 24-hour access that they will be receiving from the commercial sector, from their governments and public services as well.
Very good. Alex, a follow-up to that. We have sort of the future view of that at the organizational level. How do we get those folks locked in at the business level?
Yes. Well, if you are in a country that's exporting, and you manage an organization that's exporting to a country that is farther toward the 24-hour society concept, those consumers there indirectly drive the pace you need to set for your organization. So, for instance, if you have a factory that's producing goods for the U.S. or European markets, your customers, the corporations which purchase from you, operate in a different time pace, and you need to manage your pace of time to match theirs.
Okay, very good. We're going to move to a call now from Panama, the Universidad Tecnológico de Panama. If we could have the question, please.
What is the emotional or affective behavior of people who work 24 hours a day? What is their behavior, their emotional behavior?
Michael, let's come to you first on this question, the emotional aspects of working 24 hours a day.
Yeah, this is a very important point. And I picked up on it a bit in my presentation. Emotionally, there is a danger that can lead to a certain extent of alienation if people can't maintain their social contacts with friends and family. And as I said, that this is a problem. But we've got to look on the positive side as well. And the fact is that some people, it suits them for their way of life and emotionally to work more flexible hours. So, for instance, First Direct, who I mentioned, a telephone bank in Britain, they pay no premium to hire workers or to have workers working at the middle of the night. People work them because they want to. It suits them, their lifestyle and their emotions. And I think that's very important for employers to try and attract those sorts of employees for that sort of shift work.
Very good. Just a brief follow-up, Alex, if you've got a comment on that subject.
Well, I do agree that the emotional life is greatly affected, and in fact the emotional aspects of the organization are affected. And I'm going to talk about that a bit in my presentation, but whenever you have separations in time or in space between your people, you have less overlap, and so you have to think very carefully about how you're going to manage the emotional life of your organization. It won't happen naturally.
We certainly have seen that in the United States with sort of a disassociation of compatriots, compadres, and fellow workers in this 24-hour development. Let's move now to Lima, Peru, and a question from the Centro Internacional de Desarrollo. And the question, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I represent the CPA's college. In psychology we talk about conditioning, and that there are some social animals, and that's what we are. What strategies do you use in order to find the right balance between the real thing and the virtual in a country that is underdeveloped like ours, where one of the most greatest influences are the mass media, and we don't really teach families or users or entrepreneurs to organize their time in order to get to this 24-hour society. It's not in our culture.
Okay. If I may, I would like to break that question into two pieces and ask both of our presenters to answer them. First, going to Alex on the sort of real versus the virtual aspect of moving into a 24-hour society. Then, Michael, a follow-up question with you on some of the future aspects of that. But, Alex, please, first, the addressing of the virtual and the real piece.
Well, in a way, the virtual is becoming our reality, and this concept of a 24-hour society and the micro-societies that we're creating in our institutions in order to achieve it is the future, a part of the future of many of our societies. And so I think we need to begin to manage it at the institutional level, and we need to address it more in education. In fact, a program like this is a first step toward it.
The academic piece always comes back. We like that. Michael, if you will, please.
Yeah, I think Alex is absolutely right, and in a sense, you know, virtuality is real now, and Manuel Castells makes this point that we talk about virtual reality, but in fact, what we've got is real virtuality. I mean, that is a part of our life. But I think this is important because one of the things that we really stress in our work in Britain and in Europe is that the impact of new technology has a danger of diminishing the social aspects of our lives. And as the questioner said, you know, we are social animals, and that social, real interaction in real time, face-to-face, is very important. And so we must make sure that we maintain and develop those face-to-face interactions while the new technology is creating opportunities in the virtual field. So my own view is that because of new technology, the things which are difficult at the moment, or chores, we will do virtually, but it will enhance and re-emphasize the importance of social interactions, and that has important implications for education, for government, for business.
And we're seeing sort of a wafting effect across the whole world, aren't we, in the ability to do those things as those technologies develop. Thank you. We've received a question, or we're going to receive a question from the Universidad Autónoma de Chihuahua. And if we could have the question, please.
Good morning. In a society, in a 24-hour society, we use more resources especially because more energy, because we don't have light, right, or natural light. So have there been considerations and measures taken for the impact of this new demand in power and electricity and all of this at night that have an impact in the environment? And that is a very serious thing.
Very good question. And Michael spoke of the physiological effects of changes in nighttime and daytime, but a little bit broader question too. So Michael, if you could address this one for us.
Yeah, it's an important point in two respects. One is that it does imply more energy use. I think that's right, and the question is absolutely right with that. But of course it does help energy providers because it helps to smooth the energy patterns. And again, I showed in my presentation that one of the things that's happened in Britain is that it's actually managed to smooth out, and a lot of the problems with energy production, in fact, historically with telecoms, has been the peaks within the day, the spikes within the day, and a 24-hour operation actually helps to smooth that out. But overall, it is an increase in energy need and energy production. And we need to accept that and understand that, and I think it just reinforces the need to look at alternative measures of energy production, solar energy, for example, wind energy, all those sorts of things are going to be very important without using all of the natural oils and gases too quickly in the world.
Very good. Thank you for those insights, Michael. We appreciate them. The next question comes to us from the Comisión Federal de Electricidad en Desarrollo, Mexico. And if we could have the question, please.
The new society, the 24-hour society, and the globalization of time and productivity, will that be a guarantee for the economic benefits to really reach the majority and not the minority, the very small few multinationals or international minority? Because the thing is, the question is, who is working for whom? Because the majority ends up working for a very few, for a very small minority on a global level.
Okay, thank you for that question. I'm going to direct it to Alex to address it on both the levels, Alex, if you will, beginning with the benefits of going to this 24-hour society and how it impacts perhaps larger groups versus smaller groups.
Yes, well, I think it's important to recognize that we haven't necessarily, as a globe, chosen to go down this path. It's happening as a result of the economic development paths, the parallel paths that many countries are on. And I think that the caller has a very good point, that we are not really managing the change centrally anywhere, and it very well could end up, in fact it is in some ways ending up being a detriment to many people. Think of the difficulties of sweatshop labor in many countries. This is a growing problem, and it's the result of the pressures from industrialized nations to source products from factories that run around the clock on very tight production schedules at very low labor rates. So yes, you're right. There's issues that need to be thought about economically and socially.
Just a brief follow-up, Michael. Thank you, Alex, for that, by the way. But Michael, just a brief follow-up, if we can.
Yeah, I think this is a political question, obviously, and I think it's one that we need to watch because it can work both ways. One thing, it allows globalization in 24 hours, the removal of some of the barriers. So it's a way that some of the poorer countries can better take part in the global economy. However, it also increases the possibility of exploitation of those countries and those workers, and that is a political issue.
Excellent responses, gentlemen. Thank you. Let's move to our next question, if we may, from the Federación Nacional de Comerciantes in Medellín, Colombia.
Good morning. Currently, there are many and greater and faster technological advances that are trying to reduce the time in which man does the things. But this has made also placed man at the service on a 24-hour basis to the organization, and all of that just for the client, to service the client. But doesn't this also diminish the quality of life of that human talent? Don't we become the servants of something else?
Excellent question. I'd like to get both of your inputs, so let's try to keep our answers somewhat brief. But tying a person to an organization and then the quality of life here. So, Alex, if you would start with that, please.
Yes. Well, it would be fascinating to do an entire session on the subject, in fact. I think that there's two paths that individual organizations and their employees can be on as they move toward a 24-hour society. And I'm going to address this at length, so I needn't here. But one involves more creative, innovative responses to interesting challenges at work. And if your workers are on that path, it needn't be dehumanizing, but you have to make the choice to do that.
Michael, your thoughts on this?
Well, on the quality of life point of view, it's a very important point. I think it's very critical that government and employers understand this, that there is a danger. This is inevitable, this trend, but there is a danger that it will adversely affect people's quality of life, and everything must be done by employers and governments to counter that.
Good. Thank you, gentlemen, both for those. Our next call comes from the Universidad Tecnológico. I'm going to try and pronounce this properly. Nezahualcóyotl. So if we may have the question, please, and I'm sorry if I have not pronounced it properly.
Good morning, thank you. The question is the following. When we are supposed to change to become a 24-hour company for service companies or other companies, then the only alternative we have is to become a 24-hour company. Then we have to extend our service hours, and we have to adapt ourselves to all these different schedules and new hours. There was really no question here. It's a comment if you would like to elaborate on the comment.
Okay, well, I think...
How can we make that adaptation?
Very good. I think the adaptation then, Michael, fits directly into your comments in your presentation about being forced into a 24-hour society, and perhaps you could comment on that.
I think it is inevitable. Countries are going to be forced into this. And you will need to adapt to survive. It's one of the unfortunate, hard pressures of globalization. You will need to adapt to 24-hour service. But you can. You can use technology is one way to ease the transition.
We can adapt, and in some places, as I think the caller indicated, we must adapt. Okay, our next call comes to us from Centro Costarricense de Ciencia y Cultura in San Jose. And if we may have the question, please.
My question is, how will the 24-hour society affect the individual amount of working
La
hours?
cantidad.
According to your opinion,
En su opinión, ¿cree usted que la gente va a tener más o
what's the relation between the 24-hour society and the individual free time for leisure and so on?
Okay, we're going to take this question and seek a brief answer again between the combination of a 24-hour society and seeking leisure time. Alex, perhaps you could give us a brief answer on this one.
Well, Michael probably is the expert on this, but in the United States, we have seen over the last decade or two people working more and spending a little less time in leisure. So if we allow the trend to happen naturally unmanaged, I think we will see that leisure time is hurt. And the question is, can we do something about that?
I'm interested extremely briefly, Michael. Are we seeing regional differences in this combination of 24-hour global regionals versus perhaps Europe versus the United States, leisure and 24-hour society?
There are differences between different countries from around the world, but I think that one of the broad, of which there are many, global trends is certainly a perception of squeezing of leisure time. But I look at this positively. I think the flexibility that the 24 hours can offer will make it easier for people to manage their time and manage their days, and therefore, on the whole, will be positive for work and for leisure.
Very good. Thank you very much for your questions. Now let's turn to our Module 2.